This is a conversation with Bill and Gayle Newman, he wrote. The curator now, Stephen, is going to be moderating. So I'd like to turn things over to Stephen and on with the show.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I have tremendous respect for Deborah. I have for years and years. I think we met about 12 years ago. I've been at the museum 16 years, and I think we met not long after I got there. And this is something I think we might have talked about in 2003. And so here we are in 2016. Better late than never, but I am thrilled to be here at this conference today. And there's no better people that I'd like by my side than my good friends, Bill and Gayle Newman, who need no introduction, of course, and I want to get right into it. Bill and Gayle, you know, we all know you from those pictures on the grass covering your children moments after the assassination. Let's begin today a little before that. Gayle, I'm going to start with you because, as Deborah says, you never get the chance to talk very often. Take me back to November 21st, 1963. Give me a snapshot of the Newmans, 22 years old at that time. What was your life like before the assassination?
Well, Bill was working in the electrical trade, and he had gone and taken an exam for his journeyman license. And he was awaiting the results of that test, and he had a couple of days off. We had read in the paper about the president coming into town and decided that we wanted to take the boys. I think that we were really more interested in seeing the president than the boys were because they were only 2 and 4. And so we get up that morning and put on our Sunday best clothes because that's what you did back in the 60s. You didn't, just run out in T-shirts and flip-flops. I don't even think they had flip-flops back then. But we drove to the airport, Love Field, and we saw the plane land and saw President Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy get off the plane and go over to the limousine. Before they got into this limousine, they walked along a fence area, and Bill was able to he was carrying Clayton, and he ran over to that area, and they were able to get a real good look at the president and the first lady. Billy and I got stuck in the crowd, so we decided that we would go downtown somewhere, and we just happened to end up in Dealey Plaza. It was not planned.
Bill, you got a chance to actually see the president briefly at Love Field. Do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Well, like Gayle said, I managed to get up against the fence and had a very plain view of the president and the first lady. The parade route had been published in the paper, and so we knew where it was going to end up, and we jumped in our car and tried to get ahead of it and parked in behind the Daltex building and came on down. There was a large crowd at Houston and Elm, and so we just walked along the north side of Elm Street till we fell in beside a couple of people.
You just wanted a good view, so you went all the way down the line till the crowd thinned out.
Sure, that's correct.
Okay. Now, Gayle, there was another reason why you were excited to see the parade that day, because you had a family member in the parade. Tell me about that.
My Uncle Steve Ellis was motorcade, and he led the motorcade. He had led motorcades for several presidents that had visited Dallas, and the children were very fond of him, so we were anxious to see Uncle Steve. So as he passed us, we hollered and yelled and waved, and he sort of nodded his head. He was very stoic, and we were excited that he was there.
Now, in the moments before the parade arrived, did either of you notice anything in the plaza? Did you notice people in particular? I know you noticed Abraham Zapruder. Tell me about that.
I did notice Abraham Zapruder. I need to remind Gayle, though, that Uncle Steve had his hands on those handlebars on that motorcycle, and it was kind of difficult, for him to visit with us as he went by.
Already rewriting history.
Right.
Okay.
And actually, he was on the other side of the Triple underpass when the shots rang out. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. But he said later that he knew something bad had happened. He recognized it as gunfire at that time. But
You noticed Zapruder. What did you say
Well-
to Gayle about Zapruder?
well, I looked back and I saw Mr. Zapruder up there, and of course at the time it just registered in my mind that it looked like O.L. Nims, which was a local, somewhat of a celebrity and character in Dallas. He was a wealthy man, and I'd seen him on TV before. And afterwards, I had the thought that, my gosh, I hope that wasn't O.L. Nims up there, and he shot the president. You know, that's kind of how I felt about it. But of course, as it turned out, it was Mr. Zapruder with his camera.
Besides Zapruder, did either of you notice any other bystanders in particular that day?
I recall seeing the men on the steps, you know, halfway up the step, the three men there, and of course the two ladies that was adjacent to us. But
Any conversation before the parade arrived?
no, Stephen, you know, as you know, we've done this over the years and multiple times, and the story always changes a little bit. And I was reading where I testified in New Orleans.
We'll get to that.
And I said, you know, we'd been there probably about 15 minutes. Well, the reality of it is there's no way we'd been there 15 minutes. I mean, we'd probably been there less than 3 or 4 minutes, you know. But that's just a little thing that happens. I try to stay as close as I can to what I recall, but everybody in this audience can pick something out at some point that I've said a little differently, but I've tried to stay on the main theme.
Sure. Well, you and Gayle, I was telling you this outside, you are probably the most accessible of the Dealey Plaza eyewitnesses. I think most of us would agree, as far as eyewitnesses that have been willing to tell their story to researchers and book authors and documentarians and the news media over and over and over again. I don't think you have an exact count of how many. Let's just say 1,000. Let's shoot for 1,001 today. I'm going to ask each of you just to kind of go through your memories. I think we all know the story, but there's something really special about hearing you say it. Bill, take us through those moments and tell me what you recall.
I'll do the best I can. And you're right. Many of the researchers that come to us, they can quote verbatim what we're going to say, but they do just want to hear us say it. And like Gayle said, we drove down near Dealey Plaza and parked our car, walked down to the intersection of Houston and Elm, and just came on down the north side of Elm and stopped about midway, we'll say, between Houston and the Triple Underpass. We'd been there a very short time, and you could actually hear the parade, coming down Main Street, the cheering of the people and everything. So, I mean, we were focused, or at least I know I was focused on the intersection of Main and Houston. And I can recall seeing the car turn right onto Houston, travel that short block, and turn left onto Elm. The president's car was not against the north curb. It was out the width of one lane from the curb in the middle lane coming towards us. And when the car got within, I'm going to say 100 feet, it was probably, could have even been less than that, because in reality it's such a small area. But we'll say within 100 feet of us, the first two shots rang out. And I can recall it was kind of like a boom, boom, about like that. And I thought somebody had thrown a couple of firecrackers against the president's car. And I thought, you know, that's a pretty poor joke to do something like that. And in my affidavit that we later on gave that day, I even said the president stood up or raised up in the car, when in reality what he actually did, he come up somewhat and something in this manner, and I'm sure it was a reaction from the bullet that went through his back probably. It was more like that. So I've taken some flack, even from Dan Rather, about making the statement that he stood up. Actually, in that affidavit, it said that I heard 2 shots, which I'm here today, and I've always stood by this. I heard at least 3 shots. but I did not even recognize the first 2 shots as gunfire. But as the car got closer to us and straight out in front of us, and about as far as from here to this man in the blue shirt, the 3rd shot rang out, and the side of President Kennedy's blew off in the white matter, and you could see the blood. And here again, I stated that his ear blew off. Sometime later, it might have been several years later, I saw an autopsy photo where that right ear was still in place. But at that moment, I just had the sensation that the whole side of his head blew off, and you could probably set a baseball in it. I turned to Gayle. I said, "That's it," hit the ground. And we actually stumbled over our children, but everybody gives us credit for covering them. So we take that credit, and we had them down on the ground. And here's something that I almost hate to bring up, but I just can't keep myself from it. I can remember looking back, and also I recall when President Kennedy was hit, that he went over and back in the car, more or less in her direction or her arms. And in looking back, whether this is the truth or not, I swear to God I believe it, the car momentarily stopped. Now, when I say momentarily stopped, I mean I saw the tail lights and kind of how a car rocks when you hit the brakes a little sudden. And the Secret Service man who was on the passenger side, it seemed to me like he was trying to talk to somebody on, sure it was a two-way, but it looked like a telephone in his hand. And as the Secret Service man got aboard the car and pushed Mrs. Kennedy back, the driver must have floorboarded the car, and it just shot out and went under the triple underpass. When you look at the Zapruder film, to me, it always is a confusing point because I just see the motion of the car go by, and it looks like it's going at a constant speed and never stops. And if that's a fact, well, then I'm just imagining what I just got through telling you. Now, if you quote me that I say the car stopped, I don't mean it stopped for no 15 seconds. It was just a very momentarily action, and then it shot off. But I'll still always make that statement, and I'm not trying to create anything when I say that. I also remember some men, I thought they flopped back the cover on the convertible behind and coming out with what I'd say short rifles, kind of like what I would imagine a Thompson submachine gun, and a couple of them going up the grassy knoll, in that direction behind me. But that's just stuck in my mind, and I've always said it. I think I've said it from the beginning, Stephen, these statements.
We're going to go through some of the things that you've said over the years about where the shots came from and things like that. Let me give Gayle the chance to go through the same sequence because everybody remembers things differently. That's the magic and the frustration of eyewitness accounts. Excuse me. Gayle, walk us through those moments from your perspective.
Okay, we walked down the edge of the curb, and we were standing right at the edge of the street on the curb with the children. And really, I didn't pay attention to what was going on around us. I was more concerned with my children. And the first 2 shots, as Bill said, I thought were firecrackers also. And it ran through my mind, that's such bad taste for someone to do something like that. And I had never been around gunfire, so I didn't know what it sounded like. And then our attention was on the limousine as it came, and it was directly in front of us when that 3rd shot rang out. And you could just see bits of flesh just fly up in the air, and this white matter come out, and he fell over into Mrs. Kennedy's lap. At that time, Bill said, "That's it, hit the ground." we didn't stumble over the children. We laid them down gently and covered them with our. Bill's a big teaser. He likes to say we were trying to run away and just stumbled over them. But
That's her story.
we were there just a few minutes, and I do remember I didn't see the limousine drive off. I was sort of looking around in a daze, and I do remember Bill slamming his fist on the ground, and you may have seen some short video clips of that, and he said, "Some son of a bitch just shot the president." And, you know, that sort of stuck in my mind. We noticed people running up the grassy knoll, and we stood up, but like Bill said, I saw guns, and I was still afraid that we were going to be caught in a crossfire or something. I was really terrified for my children and for Bill. I didn't really think about myself, but I was terrified for my children because they were so young.
Now, in some of the close-up shots, of course, while you're laying on the ground protecting the kids, photographers are all around you taking pictures of you. In some of the close-up shots, it's clear that little Clayton, the youngest, is holding something in his hand. And in the WFAA interview that you recorded 15 minutes or so after the assassination, you can see that Clayton is playing with a pair of pliers, which apparently he had all during your time in Dealey Plaza. I've asked you this before, but has anything come to mind as to why little Clayton had a pair of pliers with him on the day of the assassination?
We didn't even realize it until the 50th anniversary.
Yeah. Well, it's just one of those things that sticks out because you can see he's holding something in his hand, and he's playing with him on the air at Channel 8. So you're on the ground, people are taking your picture. Two men approach you. There's a little bit of debate about exactly who it was that approached you. Jerry Haynes from WFAA, certainly. There are some conflicting statements as far as, was it Jay Watson from Channel 8 or was it Pierce Allman from WFAA Radio? Pierce says it was him.
I can clear that up.
Oh, go ahead.
It was Jay Watson.
Okay.
Now Pierce Allman did say that he came up to us and spoke to us and asked us if we was all right. And, you know, I cannot confirm that, nor can I deny it. I mean, I was in a little bit of a state of shock. The man very well could have done that, but it was Jay Watson that was with Jerry Haynes.
No question in your mind.
Not in my mind.
Okay. Now, real quick, before we take you from Dealey Plaza over to the Channel 8 studios, a couple of really basic questions. Did either of you see or smell gun smoke?
I did not.
No?
No.
Did you see any officials or someone that looked like they were official, anybody with guns on the ground, not in a car, but actually on the ground, around where you were?
After the shot?
After the shots, other police officers, but men in suits, that sort of thing?
Well, like I said just a few moments ago, I thought I saw at least a couple of men run up the grassy knoll area, they called it, straight behind us with what looked like they were short rifles, you know, something like a Thompson.
How were these guys dressed?
They were in suits. I mean, I actually thought they came off the car behind us, behind the president's car. But in reality, I think the head count, the number that was on there was the number that arrived at Parkland Hospital.
Which is why I'm asking you about those guys.
Yeah. So, you know, if in fact that did occur, it must have been somebody else.
Because, you know, Malcolm Summers, which I know you've met him over the years, he's passed away now, but he saw something very similar to that. And
what we saw.
Yeah, about a man with a gun going up the grassy knoll. But you didn't speak to any of those guys?
No.
Okay.
And people, I don't know if you're coming to this, or people say, well, why'd you hit the ground? Well, I thought that head shot was coming right over our top of us and it struck the president. Now, in making that statement, people use that statement to say that I said the shots came from behind. And what I actually said was I thought the shots came from behind because of the way the president reacted in the car, falling back towards Miss Kennedy, and you know, the sudden shock of that headshot. I'm still believe it's very possible the shot did come from behind. If you're taking my picture and you're a researcher and you're a sixth floor person, you take my picture with the sixth floor.
And that's not
in the
fair.
picture. If you're the a fence person, and I've said the shot came from behind you, when you photograph me, the fence is behind me.
Yeah, it's a matter of perspective.
But to me, it's somewhere, but in my mind, I was thinking somewhere between the school book depository and the structure that's there, back in.
The
towards
colonnade.
towards those bushes.
Well, now I
But-
have.
But
Yeah, go ahead.
physically, I saw nothing other than the reaction of the president, because my focus the whole time was on the car.
Okay. Now, I have here a transcript of what you said on WFAA. Just to catch the story up, you go to the Channel 8 studios, they put you on the air immediately, they interrupt the Julie Bennell show on WFAA, and then you're on the air within about 15 minutes, clearly shaken, the two of you, 22 years old with your two kids, having just seen what you saw.
And very often you'll find a zipper hidden in the arm. And
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You'll excuse the fact that I'm out of breath, but about 10 or 15 minutes ago, a tragic thing, from all indications at this point, has happened in the city of Dallas. Let me quote to you this, and you'll excuse me if I am out of breath. A bulletin, this is from the United Press, from Dallas. President Kennedy and Governor John Connally have been cut down by assassins' bullets in downtown Dallas. They were riding in an open automobile when the shots were fired. The president, his limp body carried in the arms of his wife, Jacqueline, has rushed to Parkland Hospital. These people, and you will excuse me, I don't want to interrupt you. I'm so sorry, because I know that you are so upset, but I would like to talk to you for a minute. So it's a little bit awkward, so the camera shots will have to fall as they may. I'm going to stand right here, and maybe somebody can give me a chair while we're doing this. May I have your name, please, sir?
Bill Newman.
And this is Mrs. Newman?
Yes, sir.
And this is
James Clayton.
James, and this is?
Billy.
Billy, tell me what you saw and what you felt. What happened to you?
We just come from left field after seeing the president and the first lady, and we were just in front of the triple underpass on Elm Street, and we were at the edge of the curve, getting ready to wave at the president. So
You were down under the viaduct, so to speak, weren't you?
Well, we were halfway in between
On the grass
triple underpass. We were at the curb when the incident happened. But the president's car was some 50 feet still yet.
In front of you?
In front of us, coming towards us, and we heard the first shot, and the president, I don't know who was hit first, but the president jumped up in his seat, and I thought it scared him. I thought it was a firecracker, because he looked, fear. And then as the car got directly in front of us, well, a gunshot apparently from behind us hit the president in the side of the temple.
Do you think the first gunshot came from behind you, too?
I think it came from the same location. Apparently back up on the mall. I don't know what you call it.
For the benefit of nomenclature, all you folks have gone out under the viaduct, and as you turn, going under the viaduct on the left-hand side, there's some grass. Do you think the shot came from up on top of the viaduct toward the president? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Not on the viaduct itself, but up on top of the hill,
On
the
the
little
hill
mound
there.
of ground there, the garden.
How far away would you say that is from where the president was? A couple of 300 yards, something like that?
Well, I have no idea, because I didn't see where the gunshot come from. We were looking directly at the president when he was hit, and he was more or less directly in front of us, and we didn't realize what happened until we seen the side of his head whenever the bullet hit him in the head.
Did you see the blood
I've
coming
seen
from the
that.
president's head?
Yes, sir, we seen that. I seen that. I don't know if my wife did, but I seen that.
Did
Oh,
you?
yes, sir. It was awful.
It is awful.
It's pretty clear, I think, to researchers who have seen that, read it over the years, that 22-year-old Bill Newman in 1963 seems to be talking about the grassy knoll. I mean, are you saying that that's not really what you meant to say?
No. I think that's what my intent. I mean,
Okay.
I think we're calling the area before the physical structure. In the direction of the sixth floor museum. That area right behind me there, that elevated area, is where I imagine the shots were coming from.
Gayle, what about you? I noticed that at Channel 8, Jay Watson never asks you where you thought the shots came from, because throughout history, starting with Jay Watson and going right up to the present day, apparently because you're the wife, you don't have as good a hearing as Bill, and your eyes are not as good as Bill. But what do you think? Because even when Jim Garrison, when the Clay Shaw trial was going on, they interviewed Bill far more thoroughly about the shots than they did you. But tell us what you observed and where you think they came from at that moment.
Okay. Mine was actually visual. I'm sure that I was leaning down, talking to my children, saying the president's car is going to be coming, right here. And just seeing him fall over into Mrs. Kennedy's lap, per se, I assumed that the shots, had come from behind us because the way he fell. There's a lot of people that don't even realize I was there. Bill's very recognizable, and it doesn't bother me any because people don't even realize that I exist. I was telling Stephen, back then I was Mrs. Bill Newman. I wasn't Gayle Newman. And in fact, I'm a member of a women's club in Mesquite. Bill calls them the Old Biddies Club. But until I was president in 2000, and quit.
They've been married a long time, folks.
In 2000, our books previously we had been listed as members as Mrs. Bill Newman or Mrs. Joe Smith, etc. In 2000, when I was president, I changed it up, and now we're known as Gayle Newman, Susie Smith.
That's great. And if I can just do a quick plug for our YouTube channel, I had the pleasure of doing just a solo interview with Gayle for some school kids several years ago. Bill wasn't available that day. And it's a really interesting conversation because I've interviewed these folks for many times over the years, but just having... Oh, well, they don't care. But I've known them since I was about 8 years old or so. But they've been part of my life a long time. But Gayle and I had this conversation with these school kids, and it's just a very different dynamic. So I'd encourage you to go on our YouTube channel and watch that solo interview and just hear Gayle tell the whole story, because it's very interesting. Not that you're not, but it's interesting to hear from Gayle too.
Stephen, you used to be such a nice guy.
I know. I wonder what happened. All right. So from Channel 8, these nice sheriff's deputies. You first of all, you do a radio interview with Ted Cassidy, Lurch from the Addams Family, which sadly does not exist. Later on Channel 8, they interview Gayle very briefly by yourself.
We were standing next to the curb so the children could see the president, and the car was just up a piece from us, and this shot fired out, and I thought it was a firecracker. And the president kind of raised up in his seat, and I thought, he was kind of going along with a gag or something. And then all of a sudden this next one popped, and Governor Conley grabbed his stomach and kind of laid over to the side. And then another one, it was just all so fast, and President Kennedy reached up and looked like he grabbed his ear, and blood just started gushing out. And my husband said, "Quick, get down." And I grabbed the baby, and we ran and laid down on the grass, and I got on top of him. It was just right by us when it all happened, just right in front of us.
Well, when I saw you looking over the balcony there, you and your husband and your two little children, who's this one now?
This is James Clayton.
Hi, baby.
Can you say hi? He's got some candy.
What you doing?
He doesn't talk.
He's cute. He didn't say anything?
Oh, he can talk.
Does he?
He can say thank you.
Have you seen President Kennedy before?
We were out at the airport, and we didn't get a very good view of him. And so we decided we'd try to get downtown to see him, because Billy, that's our youngest son, is getting old enough that he remembers things like that, and we wanted him to be able to say that he saw President Kennedy. And
now he will be able to say that he saw President Kennedy when he was shot.
Yes, he's already saying, "Mother, why would someone want to shoot President Kennedy?" Children, you don't realize how they catch on to things, but he's already talking about why would they want to kill him. And that's a question that everyone will
You didn't
be
see anybody? You didn't
No,
see anyone.
it happened so fast that you didn't have a chance to see anything. It just was too fast.
And then they catch you in the newsroom and call you Mr. Nunley, and Jay talks to you again. And
There was a gentleman who was an eyewitness. Helen, is he here? Mr. Nunley, would you come in, please? When I first looked over the balcony to where the chaos was taking place, this gentleman and his wife and 2 children were on the grass. Now, once again, if you joined us originally when we cut into the program about 1:15 to 1 o'clock, you heard his statement. Mr. Nunley, would you tell us once again exactly what, Mr. Newman, I'm sorry, look right there. Mr. Newman, will you tell us exactly what you know?
Well, my wife and my 2 sons were standing at the curb looking at the president approaching us, and we heard a blast, and the president looked like that he jumped up in his seat, and by that time he was directly in front of us, and then we seen him get shot in the side of the head, and he fell back in the seat, and Governor Connolly was holding his stomach.
And the shots were almost simultaneously, weren't they?
Yes, sir, they were probably 10 seconds apart.
Do you know who fired the 3rd shot?
I didn't hear a third. I don't recall a 3rd shot. There may have been. My family hit the ground, and I don't recall a 3rd shot.
it's just all very chaotic. But these nice men from the sheriff's department come and take you, and you are sequestered with some other eyewitnesses. I just want to get a sense of what that was like. You're still with the kids at this point. Your day is just stretching on and on and on. Tell us about being at the Dallas County Sheriff's Department with your 2 kids, waiting to give your statements with other eyewitnesses.
Well, Gayle has a good story with Clayton, our 2-year-old kid, and I'll let her tell that, or should I say allow her to tell that? I don't know how many people were in the room. There was probably 15, 20 people in the room, and they kept us there, I think, till about 9 o'clock at night, didn't they, Gayle? And Gayle and I are 2 of, I think, were 16 people that gave affidavits that day. And the reason they kept us there, we were told, was someone, whether it be the FBI or the Dallas County or who it may have been, people were going over these affidavits and compared them, and they detained us in the event they wanted to come back and review us, and because if there were conflicting statements in the affidavits. But it was just a long time of a whole lot of waiting, and I'll let Gayle give you a little interesting part with our 2-year-old.
We both went into the sheriff's area, not into an office, but where secretaries and everything were. And Bill was sitting at one desk, and I was sitting at another desk across the room, and I probably had both of the children with me. And we gave our affidavit, and then they put us in a conference room. Well, I was trying to potty train Clayton, and he realized that every time he needed to go to the bathroom, we had to get a sheriff's deputy to come and escort us to the bathroom. Well, he decided about every 3 minutes he wanted to go to the bathroom. So finally, I called my dad. It was before cell phones, so I had to get someone to let me use one of their phones. And I called my dad, and he picked the boys up about 6 o'clock. But we had them with us from about, from the morning until about 6 o'clock, but actually more confined from about 1 o'clock until 6.
Y'all taking notes on this? I see one gentleman's gone to sleep.
Oh, well, I have here the statements that you gave the sheriff's department here. I'm not going to read a lot of it. Bill, you say in yours the car sped away and everybody in the area had run up top. I thought the shot had come from the garden directly behind me, that it was on an elevation from where I was as I was right on the curb. I do not recall looking towards the Texas School Book Depository. I looked back in the vicinity of the garden. I mean, you can see from this how over the years researchers have certainly inferred where the shot came from as far as your perspective that day. Gayle, though, I want to mention something from yours. You say, after I heard the first shot, Another shot sounded, and Governor Connolly kind of grabbed his chest and lay back on the seat of the car. I know we're talking 53 years later, but as you recall, did you see Governor Connolly react prior to a second shot being fired?
I don't ever remember saying that.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's in your statement, but it certainly sounds like, from the way it was worded, and again, 22 years old after this traumatic event, but you do say in your statement here that I heard the first shot, another shot sounded, and Governor Connolly kind of grabbed his chest, and that just struck me as I was going through there, that was something we might want to talk about.
Well, I noticed that the other day. I was reviewing my statement at the sheriff's office, and I noticed that, and I thought, I don't remember that.
We didn't go over the questions we were going to talk about today. I just told him it was going to be a little different interview than we had done in the past. So I see you've done your homework. But after this was over, you finally got to go home that night. And as I understand it, some FBI guys did come on Sunday just to sort of go through these statements and just make sure what you said was accurate. And then that was it, right?
Yeah, that's correct. They came out and had our affidavit and reviewed it with us, and their purpose was, in the event, did we want to add anything to it, or did we want to change anything? We were certainly not intimidated by them. You know, you hear stories of people being intimidated, and that was not the case. That was not the experience that we had. They were very cordial people. I mean, they were very businesslike. The one thing that stood out in my mind at the time, they didn't sit side by side. One sat on this side of the room, another one sat on this side of the room, you know, which I guess that's just kind of like a action a detective would take or a military person would take for security. But they were very cordial people.
And just a very broad question. At any time between the day of the assassination and where we are today in 2016, have you ever felt threatened, intimidated, encouraged to change your story by anybody, law enforcement officials, researchers, book authors, anybody like that?
Well, no, I have not, except with the researchers. Some of them tried to get my story to align with the finish of their book. And I try, you know, I resist that, you know, because a lot of people say, well, you said so-and-so. Mm-hmm. And I try to stay on course as best I can. And in saying that, I have a great appreciation for the research people. As you know, some of them spend thousands of hours. They spend years. I mean, they give up a whole lot to continue searching for the truth. And Wes Wise, a man that used to be a celebrity on TV here, a newscaster, a sportscaster, and later on mayor, he interviewed me one time, and this was like 5 years, 10 years after the assassination. And I said, Mr. Wise, when is this going to come to an end? In other words, you know, when is people going to get tired of this? He said, oh, Bill, it's not coming to an end in your lifetime. He said, people will be calling you for the rest of your life. Well, at that time, I accepted what he said. And I've always, you know, I haven't inconvenienced myself that much, but I mean, I've always tried to accommodate people when they wanted to visit and take a picture and so forth. And I've learned over the years, it's not what I'm going to say because they already know. They just want to hear it from us, you know.
Something that doesn't often get talked about is the testimony that each of you gave at the Clay Shaw trial in New Orleans. You went separately. As I understand it, Bill was sick, so you had to go down by yourself first. First time you ever flew in a plane, right? You're not on the stand very long at all. I want to ask you specifically about your ride back, because there's a very interesting story. You got to ride with somebody kind of interesting on your way back from testifying at the trial. Will you tell us that real quick? Give her the mic.
I was in a taxi cab with Mr. and Mrs. Recruiter and a mailman from Mesquite. I don't remember his name. And we were headed back to the airport, and at an intersection, we started through the intersection and a truck almost hit us. and the assistant DA or whoever he was that was escorting us back to the airport said, "Boy, that would make headlines."
Yeah, Mr. Zapruder passed away decades ago. Just you had spent a very brief time with him in the car, but did you get any sense of his personality, what he was like?
You know, not really. I was such a scared, naive person back then that I was, you know, New Orleans scared me.
Well, you have blossomed quite a bit since those days. Now, you never actually met Jim Garrison because there was the assistants handling that.
I did not.
But Bill, you got some special attention from DA Garrison. He kind of was coaching you a little bit about what you were going to go through on the stand, and there's an interesting story there about the baseball bat. Can you tell us that real quick, and then we'll head for some questions.
Sure. Well, first off, I want to say about Jim Garrison, he treated me very well. He was truly a real gentleman. You know, I've heard different stories about Garrison, but I had a great deal of respect for the man. And obviously, before he put me on the stand, he asked me a series of questions. He asked me the same questions he was going to ask on the stand. And one of them was the direction that President Kennedy went in and kind of how sudden it was. And I made the statement, it was as if you had hit him with a baseball bat in the head. I mean, he just went across that seat. And he repeated that. He said, just like a baseball, hit him in the head. It wasn't that so much that he was coaching me, but he grabbed onto that. And he said, when you're on the stand, I want you to remember that and say it on the stand. So when we step off the elevator and go across the hall, it is packed with people. It is packed with reporters. And when we step in that courtroom, I don't know what the capacity of this room is, but if you were to triple it, that would be about how they were packed in that courtroom. It was packed. And I think I kind of lost it when I stepped in that room. But anyway, he examined me on the stand, and Clay Shaw's attorney asked me a couple of questions, and I pointed out where we were at. After leaving there, I never saw Clay Shaw to this day. I mean, he was right down in front of me there somewhere because I was so rattled about how what a confined space that was. But so that's what you want me to say.
Yeah, but you ended up not mentioning the baseball bat story.
Yeah. And so at the end of his examination of me, and I make this statement, you know, he went across the seat, and I'm like this, and he's just looking at me, not saying anything. And he says, Mr. Newman, is there anything else you'd like to add? and I'm looking at him, and I say, no, sir. And he says, you're excused. You know, that's it.
Wow.
But I missed the punchline.
Now, it's worth pointing out, as I'm sure everybody in this room knows, neither of you were called to testify before the Warren Commission.
That's
the
correct.
closest civilian eyewitnesses to President Kennedy at the moment of the fatal shot, and you were not called to testify.
That's correct.
What does that tell you? What does that mean to you?
Well, I was told that there were other people that had said basically the same story in front of, before them. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I am certainly surprised that they did not, even though they didn't call us to Washington, D.C. or wherever it took place. I'm surprised that somebody didn't come out and take a deposition from us, really. And the older I've got, you got to remember my age at the time. The older I get, I can see the significance of them at least having a deposition of what we saw,
That gets raised so often when people talk about your observations, particularly with that, in light of that video interview from Channel 8. Now, Gayle, something that a lot of these folks might not know is that you actually briefly spoke to one of the investigators from the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the 70s. It was very brief. Can you tell me about that?
It was just a very brief phone call. He identified himself and asked if I had anything that I wanted to add to our previous statement. I said, well, I can't really think of anything. We said what we saw at that time. He said, thank you very much. And that was it.
Other than that one conversation, no other government entity, law enforcement officials ever questioned you or interrogated you or anything like that over the years at all? Okay. I always we've talked a lot over the years about what you believe beyond what you maybe witnessed that day. Because Bill, especially, I know you have read a lot and watched a lot of documentaries. You've been in a lot of documentaries, but you have studied this subject in a way that maybe some of the other eyewitnesses haven't. So I always like to ask you, and your opinion has changed a little bit over the years, perhaps, in what you believe. But I'm going to ask you again in front of these fine folks here today in November of 2016. If somebody were to come up and ask you, do you think there was a conspiracy? Do you think Oswald did it alone? Just between us here, what would you say?
Don't let it out of this room. Is that what
exactly. It's just between us and YouTube.
Well, honestly, Stephen, I've always tried to keep myself in the role as a witness, because if I try to sell someone on my theory, then I think I'm discrediting my role as a witness. But I believe I could very easily defend either position. I think, and this is not a cop-out, but I think if I wanted to, I could defend there was no conspiracy, or at least that Oswald fired his shots from the window and that's it. Or I could do otherwise. And what puzzles me is the people that claim what they saw. Beverly Oliver, for example, saying that Jack Ruby said, Beverly, come over here, I want to introduce you to my friend Lee. Well, I have to accept that she's telling the truth. Gordon Oliver says that, a projectile passed by his ear.
Gordon Arnold.
Gordon Arnold, yeah. Excuse me, Gordon Arnold. And a man comes around, looks like dressed as a police officer, but he doesn't really appear to be a police officer. Is that a fabrication, or is he telling the truth? Jean Hill, what she said, the only thing she's said, a lot of things there she had, she's a nice lady, but is there some truth in all of those statements? And so, I have to think there was somebody else involved, even if Lee Harvey Oswald was the only person that day in the school book depository, and he was the only one involved in the shooting. And I'm not saying I believe that, but let's say that's a fact. I still think, obviously, there could be people behind the scenes. And I think everybody here, to some degree, has to believe that, or they wouldn't be here. So I see no harm, just like the Lincoln assassination. See no harm in people digging at the truth, searching for the truth. And so that's why I take my hat off to the time and effort that people spend trying to get to the bottom of this. And I met Mr. Bugliosi, am I tearing his name?
Bugliosi.
Bugliosi.
That's okay.
And the book that he published, and he says that's it, that's final solution. I just don't see how a person can reach the conclusion that you got the final solution. So
Not everyone agrees with that statement, of course.
Yeah, but I'm a witness, so I'm not going to get off on a tangent and start interviewing people and trying to publish my story.
Gayle, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No.
Please join me in thanking Bill and Gayle for